David was a prophet. God had sworn to him with an oath that he would seat one of his offspring on his throne. He foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of the Christ, that neither was he forsaken in the grave, nor did his flesh see corruption.
David received the promise that one of his descendants would become the messianic offspring. This promise was fulfilled in Jesus in that both his mother and his adoptive father descended from a King David.
The Greek phrase rendered offspring reflects a Hebrew idiom that literally reads, fruitage of his loins. In the human body, the loins contain the reproductive organs.
A person's offspring is also referred to as the fruit of the womb or body.
Jehovah did not allow the physical body of Jesus to decay into dust as did the bodies of Moses and David. Jehovah apparently disposed of the fleshly body of his beloved son before it began to decay. What happened to the perfect fleshly body of Jesus after his death?
It was disposed of by Jehovah God, dissolved into its constituent elements or atoms. So God caused Jesus' body to disappear, but not corrupt, meaning that it was dissolved, disintegrated back into the elements from which all human bodies are made.
In other words, it decayed really fast.
The resurrected Jesus was given a spirit body.
After his resurrection and return to heaven, Jesus resumed his service as Michael, the chief angel.
Jesus Christ, whom Jehovah confirmed with powerful works, wonders and signs. This man, Jesus, you have put to death. But God resurrected him by loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to continue to be held fast by it.
Why was it impossible for Jesus to remain dead? Well, Peter was without doubt, not only because he had seen Jesus after his resurrection, but because he understood that it is impossible for Jehovah to lie.
God swore to David that he would seat one from the fruitage of his loins upon his throne.
If his offspring were to remain dead, the promise, the sworn oath that Jehovah made to David, would be broken. If he was abandoned to the grave, he could never have been seated on his throne, and his kingdom would never be established. Peter goes on to further reinforce this promise with more scripture.
David foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of the Christ, that neither was he forsaken in the grave, nor did his flesh see corruption, because God resurrected him.
So Jehovah swore to David that he would seat one of his descendants upon his throne, and he gave him a prophetic vision of this event, in which his descendant is resurrected from the dead and seated upon his throne. Peter is applying the oath to the resurrection, and the resurrection as the reason his body will not see decay. His descendant will not be left in the grave, nor his body decay, because he will be resurrected. He will be resurrected because Jehovah swore he would be seated on his throne. In their commentary on this passage, the Watchtower states,
David received the promise that one of his descendants would become the messianic offspring.
For support, they cross-reference Genesis 3:15, 2 Samuel 7:12-13, Psalm 89, 3-4, and Psalm 132:11.
I will raise up your seed after you, which will come out of your inward parts, and firmly establish his kingdom. I will establish the throne of his kingdom. I will firmly establish your seed. I will place him on your throne forever.
The Watchtower explains what the New World Translation means by offspring in this passage. They point out the fact that offspring is referring to the fruit of the womb, and more precisely, the body, which comes forth from the womb. They explain that offspring is the product of human reproduction. Something to remember, which will come in handy in a few. From all that, the Watchtower's big takeaway is a promise the passage isn't even bringing up, that one of his descendants would become the messianic offspring. And their conclusion is,
Then this promise was fulfilled in Jesus, in that both his mother and his adoptive father descended from King David.
With their theology being the reason, which we'll see in a minute, they ignore the actual oath that's being called to attention here. Peter is not directing our attention to the promise that David's descendant will be the Messiah, though that is another promise made to David. That's not the focus here. The promise the passage is referencing is the promise that the Messiah, his offspring, will be seated on his throne to rule and reign forever. Jesus being born a descendant of David does not fulfill the promise in question. Peter ties this promise directly to the resurrection. Upon his death, the promise still had not been fulfilled. That's the reason Peter so confidently states that he cannot remain dead. The promise guarantees his body will not decay, he will not see corruption, because the oath must be fulfilled. Framing the passage in this way and ignoring the oath in question is no accident. The Watchtower is paving the way for their theology. They cannot acknowledge the oath Jehovah swore to David, because in their theology it cannot have been fulfilled. They teach that David's offspring's humanity was sacrificed and his body was disposed of. David's descendant in his entirety no longer exists. They teach that God did not resurrect David's descendant. Instead, he disposed of his body.
God caused Jesus' body to disappear, but not corrupt, meaning that it was dissolved, disintegrated back into the elements from which all human bodies are made.
So, we're told by the Watchtower, his body did not corrupt or decay because it decayed really, really fast. This is nonsense. Logically, scientifically, and biblically, dissolving or disintegrating a body back into its elements is by definition decay or corruption, no matter how fast or how slow it happens. It gets worse. The Watchtower further teaches that after David's offspring was destroyed, Michael the Archangel was recreated and seated in his place. So according to the Watchtower, rather than fulfilling his oath, Jehovah utterly destroyed David's offspring, disposed of his body, and to top it off, seated an angel in his place on his throne. Is Michael the Archangel the son of David? Is he the fruit of the womb, the bodily offspring that descended from David? Is he the product of human reproduction? Obviously not. According to the Watchtower and their New World Translation, no. According to the New World Translation, the human person Jesus is the son of David, according to his flesh. Only by being the product of human reproduction is this mere man the offspring of David. Even according to the Watchtower, Jesus and Michael are two different persons.
The Bible teaches that the soul is the entire person, not some part that survives death. Jesus had to be a real man, not a God-man.
I'm a real boy!
Jesus had to be a real man, not a God-man, to be lower than angels. If Jesus had been a spirit, masquerading in human flesh, there would have been no need for him to be born a baby. And to provide the ransom sacrifice, Jesus had to die, a perfect man. Nothing more, nothing less.
They make a very clear distinction between Michael and Jesus. They claim Jesus had to be a mere man, nothing more, nothing less. That he could not have been God in the flesh, and he also could not have been an angel in the flesh. To them, that means he wouldn't have been a real man, he would have just been a spirit masquerading as a human. The problem for the Watchtower is they teach that the offspring of David, the man Jesus, no longer exists. His humanity was sacrificed, his body was destroyed, and the spirit creature, Michael the Archangel, was recreated and seated in place of the promised offspring. Rather than keeping his promise, they have Jehovah destroying the sworn oath and making himself a liar. Yet their own New World Translation affirms Jehovah has kept his promise by resurrecting the son of David from the dead and seating him bodily on his throne. So who's right? The Watchtower or their New World Translation?